Looking back at the scorched earth and the legal wreckage, it's funny to think that this whole mess, this absolute war that turned a quiet corner of Montana upside down, started with something as simple, as honest, as a wooden fence. I didn't ask for a fight. I didn't go looking for trouble. I just wanted to mark what was mine. But when you push a man who has nothing but time and 100 years of family history beneath his boots, you better be ready for what comes back at you. My name is Elias Thorne, and the dirt I walk on, the rugged, stubborn acres of the Thorne Valley, has been in my bloodline since 1928, back when my great-grandfather bought the deed with money he scraped together from breaking wild horses and selling bootleg whiskey. This land remembers everything. It remembers the drought that nearly killed my father's herd in the 80s. It remembers the blizzards that buried the barn. And it remembers the silence, that heavy, beautiful silence that lets a man hear his own heartbeat. For decades, that was enough. Just me, the cattle, the sunrise over the Bitterroot Mountains, and my old healer, Buster, a dog with one floppy ear and a soul older than most people I meet. We had a routine, Buster and I, a rhythm that moved with the sun, checking the water troughs, mending the wire, breathing in air that smelled of pine needles and damp earth, living in a world that made sense. But the world has a nasty habit of changing when you aren't looking, or rather, it has a habit of creeping up to your doorstep and pouring concrete over the things you love. It started about 2 years ago, just beyond my northern ridge, a place that used to be wild scrub and deer trails, suddenly transformed into Vista Heights Estates, a sprawling, soulless grid of identical beige houses, manicured lawns that looked like astroturf, and streets with names like Whispering Willow, where no willows actually grew. I watched them rise like a fungus. These perfectly square boxes filled with people who loved the idea of the country but hated the reality of it. People who panicked at the sound of a coyote and thought cow manure was a toxic hazard. At first, I just turned my back to it. Let them have their HOA meetings and their rules about how many inches high the grass could be, because my deed was older than their entire development, and my property line was a sovereign border as far as I was concerned. However, that rancher's instinct, that prickle on the back of your neck that tells you a storm is brewing even when the sky is blue, started acting up when I saw how close they were building to my northern pasture. They were paving roads right up to the edge of the grass, encroaching on the buffer zone, acting like my land was just an extension of their suburban fantasy. So, I did what any responsible landowner would do. I built a new fence, not a spite fence, just a strong, distinct barrier made of treated timber and high-tensile wire, a clear visual statement that said civilization ends here, and the real world begins. I sank those posts myself, sweating through my shirt, stringing the wire tight enough to sing in the wind, and I hung the signs, plain, legal, white and red signs that read private property and no trespassing. I stood back, wiped the sweat from my eyes, and felt a sense of peace, thinking that good fences make good neighbors, or at least, they keep the bad neighbors out. I was wrong. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday, creamy, thick paper that felt expensive, with a gold foil seal that looked like something from a royal decree, addressed not to Elias Thorne, but to occupant, North Sector adjacent. I opened it on my porch, Buster watching me with his head cocked, and read a letter from a man named Marcus Vane, the president of the Vista Heights Estates Homeowners Association. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak, informing me that my rustic barrier was aesthetically non-compliant with the visual harmony of the community, and that I had 30 days to remove the unauthorized structure, or face penalties. I literally laughed out loud, a dry, barking laugh that echoed off the barn, because the sheer arrogance of a man thinking he could tell a rancher what to do with land that had been deeded before his grandfather was born was truly something to behold. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the burned barrel, and went about my day, assuming that was the end of it, assuming that silence was the best answer to stupidity. 2 weeks later, the second letter arrived, and this one wasn't polite. It was a legal threat, thick with statutes and codes that didn't apply to agricultural land, claiming that my fence created a visual nuisance, and, more disturbingly, claiming that my property line was actually infringing on planned community green space. Included was a map, a blurry satellite image where someone had taken a thick red marker and drawn a line that sliced off a good 40 feet of my pasture, claiming it for the HOA. That warmth I felt then wasn't the sun. It was the slow-burning anger of a man who realizes someone is trying to steal from him, not with a gun, but with a pen. I wrote back this time, a handwritten note on yellow legal pad paper that simply said, "My land is not your land. Check the county records. Stay off my property." And I signed it, mailed it, and waited. But guys like Marcus Vane don't read handwritten notes, and they don't respect boundaries. The escalation didn't come in the mail. It came in person, on a Thursday afternoon while I was fixing a tractor engine, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the trail cameras I'd hidden along the fence line. I pulled up the feed, wiping grease from my hands, and watched in disbelief as two men in polo shirts emblazoned with Sentinel private security logos walked right up to my fence. One was a skinny guy holding a clipboard like a shield, and the other was a beefy, red-faced man who looked like he'd failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times. I watched the beefy one shake my fence post, testing it, and then, with zero hesitation, he put a boot on the bottom rail and hoisted himself up, climbing over my fence, ignoring the sign that was 6 inches from his face. I didn't run out there screaming. I didn't fire a warning shot, because my father taught me that you never show your hand until you've got the winning cards. Instead, I hit record and saved the footage to a cloud server, watching them wander around my pasture for 10 minutes, taking photos, measuring distances, stepping on land they had no right to breathe on. They eventually climbed back over and left, high-fiving like they'd just conquered a mountain, totally unaware that they had just given me the first round of ammunition in a war they were going to lose. A few days later, I found the wire cut. It wasn't a clean break from a deer or a falling branch. It was a distinctive, pinched cut made by bolt cutters, right in the center of the span where the tension was highest, snapping the wire back and leaving a gap big enough for a person to squeeze through. I called Sheriff Miller, a good man who knew the difference between the law and justice, and he came out, looked at the cut, looked at the footage of the security goons, and shook his head, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "This is criminal trespass and destruction of property, Elias," he said, adjusting his hat. "But these HOA types, they got lawyers on retainer, and they think they're untouchable." I looked at the sheriff, then I looked at the gap in my fence, and I felt a cold resolve settle in my gut, the kind of feeling you get before you break a horse that doesn't want to be ridden. "Let them think they're untouchable," I said quietly, "because I'm about to reach out and touch them." The night after the sheriff left, I knew they would be back, because bullies, especially the kind who hide behind clipboards and bylaws, never stop until they hit a wall, and I was about to build a wall they wouldn't forget. I went to town and bought a specialized die pack, the kind banks used to mark robbers, rigged to a tripwire mechanism that was barely visible to the naked eye, and I set it up right in the gap they had cut, repairing the wire with a dummy cord that looked solid but would snap with 5 pounds of pressure. Sure enough, at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again, the screen illuminating the dark bedroom with a ghostly blue light. On the grainy black and white feed, I saw a figure in a hoodie, carrying a backpack and what looked unmistakably like bolt cutters, creeping toward the fence line with the confidence of a man who has done this before. It was the same beefy security guard from before, trying to be stealthy, but he moved with the grace of a drunk buffalo. He reached for the wire, clipped it, and stepped through the breach, his foot catching the tripwire. The result was instantaneous and beautiful. A small, silent explosion of neon orange smoke and dye that blasted him squarely in the chest and face, covering him in a chemical stain that wouldn't wash off for a week. He stumbled back, flailing, slipping in the mud, cursing so loud the microphone picked up every panic-stricken syllable, shouting, "It's a trap! He trapped us!" before scrambling back toward the subdivision like a glowing orange demon. I saved that clip, backed it up to 3 different hard drives, and went to sleep with a smile on my face. The next morning, the enemy finally showed his face. A sleek, black luxury SUV crunched up my gravel driveway, a vehicle that had never seen a speck of dirt in its life, and outstepped Marcus Vane. He was exactly as I pictured him, slicked back hair, a suit that cost more than my truck, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He walked up to my porch where I was drinking coffee, attempting to look dominant, but I didn't stand up, didn't offer a hand, just watched him over the rim of my mug. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice oily and rehearsed, "we need to talk about the unfortunate incident last night." I just raised an eyebrow. You mean the criminal trespassing on my land? He waved a hand dismissively. Let's not use harsh language. Look, my board is prepared to make you a generous offer. We want to buy that northern strip about 40 feet. We'll give you $50,000, cash, today. It resolves the dispute, cleans up the boundary lines, everyone wins. I saw it then, the desperation behind his eyes. This wasn't about a fence, this was about something else. I reached into my pocket and subtly clicked on the voice recorder I'd started carrying. And if I don't sell? I asked, my voice flat. Vane's smile faltered, replaced by a sneer. Then the Vista Heights legal team will bury you. We will file liens, environmental complaints, safety violations. We will make your life a living hell until you beg us to take the land. I stood up then, towering over him, and stepped close enough to smell his expensive cologne. Get off my land, Marcus, and take your checkbook with you. He glared, turned on his heel, and drove off. But he had just given me the confession I needed. I didn't wait. I drove straight to the county clerk's office, a dusty building that smelled of old paper and history. Mrs. Higgins, the clerk who had been there since the flood of '96, greeted me warmly. I need everything on the northern boundary, Mrs. Higgins, and I need to see the development plans submitted by Vista Heights. It took her an hour, but what she found was the smoking gun. A surveyor's map, dated 6 months prior, showed a planned access road, a massive feeder lane for a Phase 2 expansion of the subdivision, running directly through my northern pasture. They didn't care about the view. They needed my land to build a road to make millions on a new housing contract, and my fence was the only thing standing in their way. Armed with the truth, I went to the hardware store and bought the nuclear option. I purchased a high-powered, solar-charged electric fence system, the kind designed to keep 2,000-pound bulls from breaking loose, fully legal under Montana agricultural law. I spent the next 2 days reinforcing the line, putting up bright yellow warning signs every 10 feet that screamed, danger, high voltage, and livestock containment. I grounded it deep, I checked the connections, and I flipped the switch, listening to the rhythmic snap hum of 8,000 volts pulsing through the wire. It wasn't a weapon, it was a shield, and it was live. The climax of the physical war happened 3 days later. My cameras caught the Sentinel goons returning, arrogant as ever, probably sent by Vane to dismantle the fence forcefully before I could make a legal move. The beefy guard, still showing faint traces of orange dye around his hairline, walked up to the wire. He saw the signs. He read the signs. But he laughed, turned to his partner, and reached out to grab the top wire to shake it, assuming it was a bluff. The sound was like a gunshot, a loud, dry crack. The electricity hit him, muscles contracting instantly, and he flew backward as if he'd been kicked in the chest by a mule. He hit the ground, gasping, hat flying off, eyes wide with the shock of a man who just touched lightning. His partner scrambled back, terrified, dropping his phone in the dirt. I sat on my porch, watching the feed, sipping my coffee, and whispered to Buster, now they know. But I knew Vane wouldn't stop there. He would bring the lawyers, and that was fine, because I had one call left to make. I dialed Julian Cross, an old Army buddy turned land dispute attorney, a man who hated bullies more than I did. Pack your bags, Julian, I said. We're going to court, and I want to destroy them. The morning of the hearing, the air outside the courthouse was thick with tension and humidity. Marcus Vane had tried to get ahead of the narrative, calling the local news station to paint me as a dangerous lunatic setting traps for innocent neighbors. When I pulled up in my dusty truck, a news van from Channel 8 was already there, and a reporter named Sarah Jenkins shoved a microphone in my face. Mr. Thorne, is it true you electrified a fence to injure community security officers? I stopped, looked directly into the camera lens, and said calmly, Ma'am, I electrified a livestock fence on my private property to contain my cattle. If someone trespassed past 3 warning signs and touched it, that's an IQ test they failed, not a crime I committed. Julian Cross stepped up beside me, looking sharp in a Navy suit, carrying a briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain gold bars. He guided me past the cameras, whispering, Don't say another word, Elias. Save it for the judge. We're going to gut them. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The HOA board members sat in the front row, looking smug, while Vane sat with his high-priced legal team, confident that their money would crush the simple rancher. Judge O'Malley, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, called the court to order. Vane's lawyer stood up and launched into a theatrical opening statement, calling me a menace to public safety and demanding the immediate removal of the fence and damages for the emotional distress of the security guard. Then it was Julian's turn. He didn't yell. He didn't pace. He just walked to the center of the room and placed a single, large laminated map on an easel. "Your Honor," Julian began, his voice baritone and steady. "This is the official county survey from 1928. This," he pointed to a red line, "is Mr. Thorne's property. And this," he overlaid a transparency of the HOA's forged map, "is the fraudulent document Vista Heights submitted to this court." The courtroom went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Julian wasn't done. "We also have video evidence of persistent criminal trespassing." He played the clip of the orange dye explosion, earning a ripple of laughter from the gallery, followed by the clip of the guard getting zapped after ignoring the signs. Judge O'Malley watched, her face unreadable, until she saw the warning signs clearly visible in the frame. But the final nail in the coffin was the audio recording. Julian hit play, and Marcus Vane's voice filled the room, clear and arrogant. "We will file liens, make your life a living hell, until you beg us." Vane's face turned the color of old milk. He slumped in his chair, refusing to look at his own lawyer. The judge slowly took off her glasses and stared at the defense table. "Mr. Vane," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a transparent attempt at extortion and land theft." The verdict was a slaughter. Judge O'Malley dismissed every single complaint against me. She ruled that my fence was 100% legal under state agricultural statutes. But then she went further. She sanctioned the HOA for filing a frivolous lawsuit and ordered them to pay my legal fees, plus $150,000 in punitive damages for harassment and property damage. She also issued a permanent restraining order against Marcus Vane and any employee of Sentinel Security, barring them from coming within 50 yards of my property line. As the gavel banged down, echoing like a gunshot, Julian leaned over to me and grinned. "I told you, Elias. We didn't just win, we broke them." The aftermath was swift. Marcus Vane was forced to resign in disgrace after the local news ran a special segment exposing the secret road plans. The investors for Phase 2 pulled out, terrified of the bad publicity, and the expansion was canceled. The road that was supposed to cut through my pasture never happened. A few weeks later, I was out by the fence line as the sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. The air was cool, the crickets were singing, and for the first time in months, the silence was real. It wasn't the silence of waiting for a fight. It was the silence of victory. I watched a young deer hop casually near the wire, smart enough to sense the hum and keep its distance. Buster trotted up beside me, leaning against my leg. I looked at the new houses in the distance, the lights flickering on in living rooms where families were eating dinner, totally unaware of the war that had been fought just yards away. I got my piece back. I saved the land. But as I stood there, hand resting on the wooden post, I couldn't help but wonder about the world we're building. We live in a time where a piece of paper and a suit are supposed to mean more than 100 years of sweat and blood, where a neighborhood aesthetic is valued higher than a man's right to be left alone. Justice was served in that courtroom, sure. But it makes you ask the question, if I hadn't had the money for the cameras, if I hadn't thought to record that conversation, or if I hadn't found that map, would the truth have mattered? Does the law protect the land, or does it just protect the person with the best story? I won this time, but out here, on the edge of the wild, you learn one thing fast. The fence is only as strong as the man willing to defend it. What do you think? Was I too harsh with the electric fence, or did they get exactly what they deserved?